The first time I met him, I thought fate was playing some cruel joke. A man like me, who could barely order coffee without rehearsing for 20 minutes, was suddenly tied to a man who could silence an entire boardroom with just a glance. Funny, right? If life were a sitcom, the laugh track would have kicked in the moment our parents pushed us into that arranged marriage. But there was no laugh track. Just me, standing awkwardly in a courthouse, clutching my sleeves so hard I left marks on my skin, while Ethan Carter, the enigmatic CEO every magazine in New York called a genius, signed our marriage certificate like it was just another contract. For him, maybe it was. For me, it was a storm I couldn't breathe through. I have social anxiety. Not the cute kind people joke about on TikTok, but the kind that makes you feel like you're drowning in your own silence when someone stares at you too long. Crowds? Forget it. Presentations? Might as well ask me to strip naked in Times Square. And now I was married. To a man who barely spoke, whose presence filled a room with more weight than words ever could. We agreed to one thing: distance. He wouldn't pry into my quiet world, and I wouldn't disturb his fortress of cold composure. Perfect arrangement. On paper. But here's the thing about distance. The more you try to stretch it, the more fate finds ways to pull you closer. The first month was a blur of silence. Ethan worked late, sometimes not coming home until past midnight. I'd sit at the dinner table with food I barely touched, reheating it until it turned rubbery, pretending not to care. He never asked. I never offered. Two strangers under the same roof, connected by law and a last name. I told myself I preferred it this way. No expectations. No disappointments. But when I heard his key turn in the lock at night, my heart still skipped, traitorous and loud. And sometimes, just sometimes, I caught him lingering by the door, looking like he wanted to say something. He never did. Then came the night of the storm. New York sky broke open with rain so violent it rattled the windows. Power flickered, and I sat on the couch, hugging a blanket, the anxiety gnawing at me as thunder cracked the air. I hated storms. Always had. Too loud, too sudden. Like the world was shouting at me. The lights died. Darkness swallowed the apartment whole. My chest tightened, panic clawing up my throat. I fumbled for my phone, but the flashlight felt like a weak shield against the chaos outside. And then his voice. "You're afraid of storms." It wasn't a question. It was a quiet observation, spoken like he had been watching, studying. I turned, and there he was, leaning in the doorway with his tie loosened, shadows painting his face into something softer than I'd ever seen. My voice cracked. I hated how small I sounded. "It's fine. I'll manage." But I wasn't managing. My fingers trembled. My breath was too quick. He must have noticed, because Ethan crossed the room without hesitation and sat beside me. Not too close, not touching, just close enough that his presence was louder than the storm. "Breathe," he said simply. I did. Somehow, with him there, I could. That was the first crack in the wall between us. After that night, things shifted. Subtly but undeniably. He started coming home earlier, sometimes in time for dinner. He'd sit at the table, scrolling through his phone. But he was there. And when I nervously pushed a plate of pasta toward him, he actually ate it. He even complimented it. "You cook well." 3 words, delivered in his usual monotone. But they made me glow like a fool. We began sharing space. Breakfast in silence wasn't just silence, Anna Marie, it was comfortable. I'd read on the couch while he worked on his laptop beside me. Sometimes our elbows brushed. Sometimes his gaze lingered too long when he thought I wasn't looking. And me? I found myself waiting for him, listening for his footsteps, wanting to hear his voice, even if it was just a low hum on the phone with his assistant. Dangerous, right? Falling for the man you promised to keep a distance from. But the heart doesn't care about contracts. The breaking point came one evening at his office gala. I didn't want to go. The thought of hundreds of strangers, flashing cameras, endless small talk was my personal version of hell. But Ethan insisted. "You're my husband," he said. And for the first time, there was weight in his tone. Not command. Not business. Something closer to need. So I went. I wore a suit that felt too tight, clung to the edges of the ballroom like a shadow and tried not to crumble under the stairs. Whispers followed me. The mysterious spouse of Ethan Carter, finally unveiled. Some pitied me, some sneered. A few women looked at me like I was an obstacle. I wanted to run. I nearly did. But then Ethan was suddenly at my side, his hand brushing mine before sliding into it, firm and grounding. My breath hitched. He didn't let go. "This is my husband," he told a group of investors, his voice steady and proud. "And I don't need anyone else." The room blurred. My chest ached. In that moment, I wasn't just an obligation to him. I was something more. And God, I wanted to believe it. That night, back at the apartment, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Why?" I demanded, voice shaking. "Why do you pretend to care in front of them? Why make it look real when we both know it's not?" He stared at me, long enough that I almost apologized, almost retreated into silence. But then he crossed the room, closing the distance in 3 strides, and for the first time his composure cracked. "I'm not pretending," he said, low and raw. "I told myself I could keep my distance, that it would be easier. But every day with you is not distance I want. It's closeness." The world tilted. My heart slammed against my ribs. And before I could stop myself, I whispered the truth I had buried for months. "I'm scared." His hand reached for mine, warm and steady. "So am I." That was the beginning of something neither of us expected. Something fragile, terrifying, and beautiful. The next morning felt different. The air in the apartment carried a weight that hadn't been there before, like something invisible had shifted between us. I woke to the smell of coffee, strong, dark, and unfamiliar, because I never made it that way. When I walked into the kitchen, Ethan was there, still in his pressed shirt from the day before, sleeves rolled up as he poured coffee into 2 mugs. He glanced at me once, then slid one across the counter. "You like it with milk, right?" My lips parted in surprise. He had noticed. He had remembered. I nodded, taking the cup with shaky fingers. "Yeah, thank you." Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't sharp this time. It was soft, tentative, like both of us were waiting for the other to move first. I wanted to ask him what he meant last night. If closeness was really what he wanted, then why had he built so many walls? But the words tangled in my throat, and instead, I sipped my coffee until it burned. The days that followed blurred into something new. He wasn't suddenly talkative, not Hat wasn't Ethan. But he was present. He'd join me for dinner without being asked. Sometimes he'd come home with groceries, surprising me with things I hadn't dared to put on the shopping list. Me favorite cereal, the specific brand of tea I thought nobody noticed me drinking. And me, I found myself watching him more. The way his brows furrowed in concentration when he typed on his laptop. The way his hand brushed through his hair when he was tired. He wasn't cold like I thought. He was careful, reserved. Someone who had learned to keep his heart locked behind steel doors. And I wanted to know what was behind them, but fear lingered. Always. The first real fracture came on a Friday night. He was late. Not unusual. But this time, when I called his office, his assistant told me he'd already left. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. My anxiety clawed at me, whispering worst-case scenarios: an accident, an affair, or maybe he'd simply decided I wasn't worth coming home to. When the door finally opened at 2 a.m., relief crashed over me so violently that I forgot to hide it. "Where were you?" I blurted, my voice too loud in the quiet apartment. He froze in the doorway, looking startled, maybe even guilty. His tie hung loose, his shirt wrinkled. "Meetings," he said curtly. "Until 2 in the morning?" My chest heaved. "You could have called. Do you know what it's like to sit here just waiting, not knowing if you're..." My voice cracked, humiliation burning my cheeks. "Forget it." I turned away, ashamed of my outburst. Vulnerability was dangerous. Showing how much I cared was dangerous. But then his hand caught my wrist, gentle but firm. "You waited for me?" he asked, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. I couldn't look at him. "Of course I did. You're my husband." The word hung in the air like a confession. Husband. Not a contract. Not an arrangement. Something real. His grip tightened just slightly, and when I finally looked at him, there was something raw in his eyes. Something that scared me more than his silence ever did. "I'll call next time," he said, and it sounded like a promise. But promises are fragile things. The second act of our story began not with tenderness, but with fire. It started at another one of his galas. This time I thought I'd be ready. I rehearsed breathing exercises, practiced polite smiles in the mirror, told myself I could survive one evening. But the crowd was merciless. Cameras flashed like lightning. People whispered, their curiosity thinly veiled as they asked invasive questions. How did we meet? Why me? What did I bring to his life? My answers came out awkward, stuttering, feeding their smirks. I felt small, foolish, like a child wearing clothes too big for him. And then she appeared. Her name was Madison Gray, a tall, elegant woman with perfect blonde hair and a reputation as one of the city's fiercest business strategists. She walked straight to Ethan with the ease of someone who had known him for years. She touched his arm when she laughed. She spoke his name like it belonged to her. I stood there, invisible, until she looked at me. "So this is the husband," she said, her smile sharp as glass. "You're not what I expected." Heat flooded my face. I wanted to disappear, to vanish into the marble floor. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything. Not yet. I excused myself before the tears could fall. Slipped outside into the cold night air, my lungs burning with panic. When Ethan found me minutes later, I couldn't hold back. "Why didn't you say anything?" I demanded, voice breaking. "Why didn't you defend me?" He looked pained, torn between his public mask and something softer. "I didn't want to make a scene." A scene. I laughed bitterly, the sound ugly in my throat. "You let her humiliate me. Do you know how hard it is for me just to be here? To stand in front of people who are all waiting for me to fail." He stepped closer, but I backed away. The tears fell now, unstoppable. "I can't do this, Ethan. I can't be the silent accessory you parade around when it suits you." For once, his composure cracked. His hand reached for me, but stopped halfway, trembling. "I never saw you that way. Not for a second." "Then what am I?" I whispered. His eyes locked on mine, desperate. "The one thing I'm afraid to lose." The words hit me like thunder. But fear is louder than love sometimes. And in that moment, fear won. I walked away. The days that followed were colder. Distance returned, sharper this time, filled with the echo of words unsaid. He buried himself in work. I buried myself in silence. We circled each other in the apartment like ghosts. Two hearts beating on opposite sides of a wall neither of us knew how to tear down. But love has a way of clawing through cracks. One evening, a week after the gala, he came home earlier than usual. I was in the living room, curled under a blanket, pretending to read. He stood in the doorway, watching me for a long time before finally speaking. "Do you want to know why I married you?" he asked. The question startled me. My book slipped from my hands. "What?" He walked closer, every step deliberate. "Everyone thinks it was business. That I agreed to this marriage because it was convenient, safe. But the truth is I saw you once, years ago." My breath caught. "What do you mean?" "I was at a cafe near campus," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "You were sitting by the window, sketching in a notebook. You didn't notice me, but I noticed you. The way you looked at the world, like it terrified you and fascinated you at the same time. I couldn't forget it." My heart raced. I remembered that cafe. I remembered the sketchbook. But him? I had no memory of him being there. "I told myself it was just a moment," he continued. "But when the chance came to marry you, I couldn't say no. Because deep down, I already knew you were the one thing that could break through my silence." Tears blurred my vision. I shook my head, overwhelmed. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid that if I reached for you, you'd disappear." And in that moment, the wall between us cracked wide open. When Ethan's confession finally spilled into the quiet of our apartment, it should have been the moment everything changed. It should have been the moment I let go of fear and stepped into the warmth I had been aching for. But instead, it broke me, because how could I trust it? How could I believe that someone like him, flawless, untouchable, admired by everyone, had chosen me? A man who could barely breathe in crowded rooms, whose hands trembled at the thought of strangers' eyes. I don't understand, I whispered, voice trembling. Why would you want me? Why me, when you could have anyone? He stared at me with a desperation that stole the air from the room. Because anyone else isn't you. The words sank into me, sweet and unbearable. My chest tightened until I thought I'd break. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to step forward and let myself fall into the safety of his arms. But the fear was louder. Fear of being a burden. Fear of disappointing him. Fear of being left. So I shook my head, stepping back. I can't be what you need. His face hardened, the vulnerability snapping shut behind walls of steel. And what do you think I need? Someone strong. Someone confident. Someone who can stand beside you in every room without falling apart. My throat burned as I forced the words out. Not me. The silence that followed was worse than shouting. He didn't argue. He didn't try to change my mind. He just looked at me, eyes filled with 1,000 things unsaid, before finally turning away. That night, he didn't come to bed. The days after were unbearable. We lived in the same apartment, but it felt like two separate worlds. He left early, came home late, moved through the rooms like a shadow I couldn't touch. I told myself this was what I wanted: distance, safety, a return to the contract we had agreed upon. But every empty dinner table, every cold side of the bed, carved deeper into me. And the worst part? I missed him. I missed his presence beside me on the couch, the quiet steadiness of his voice when storms rattled the windows, the way his hand would brush mine and set my whole body alight. I missed the closeness I had been so afraid of. Loneliness pressed down on me until it suffocated. One evening, unable to bear the silence any longer, I wandered into his study. He wasn't home, but the room smelled faintly of him: coffee, ink, something sharp and clean. Papers were stacked neatly on his desk, but what caught my eye was a leather-bound notebook left open. I shouldn't have looked. I knew that, but curiosity clawed through me, desperate for some piece of him I could hold on to. Inside were sketches, not of buildings or business charts, but of me. Me reading on the couch. Me cooking at the stove. Me, asleep with the blanket pulled up to my chin. Dozens of sketches, each one careful, tender, so full of detail it made my chest ache. Tears blurred my vision. For all his silence, for all his distance, he had been watching me, seeing me in ways no one else ever had. But instead of comfort, guilt crashed over me, because I had pushed him away. I closed the notebook with shaking hands, my heart pounding. When he came home that night, I wanted to tell him, to apologize, to beg him to let me try again. But the words stuck in my throat when I saw him exhausted, his tie loosened, his expression guarded. He barely looked at me as he walked past, and I realized something terrifying. If I didn't do something soon, I was going to lose him. The breaking point came a week later. We were both invited to a high-profile charity gala. I dreaded it, but refusing wasn't an option. His company's reputation depended on appearances, and as his husband, mine did too. From the moment we arrived, the whispers started again. People eyed me like I was a curiosity, an oddity that didn't belong in their glittering world. My palms sweated, my breath came too fast, and every laugh felt like it was aimed at me. I clung to Ethan's side, but he was distant, polite, composed, his attention fixed on conversations I couldn't follow. He didn't notice the way my hands shook, the way my chest tightened until I could barely breathe. And then Madison appeared again. She smiled, sharp and flawless, sliding into his space with the ease of someone who thought she belonged there. "Ethan," she purred, touching his arm. "I've missed seeing you at these events. And your husband." Her eyes flicked to me, dismissive, amused. Still trying to play the part? The words hit like a slap. My stomach twisted, nausea rising. I waited, begged silently for Ethan to say something, to defend me, to make me feel like I wasn't just a shadow in his world. But he said nothing. He didn't even look at me. The air cracked inside my chest. My vision blurred. Couldn't breathe. I excused myself, stumbling out into the cold night, my body shaking with panic. Minutes later, Ethan found me on the steps outside. "Why do you let her talk to me like that?" I demanded, voice raw. "Why do you let them all treat me like I'm nothing?" His face was unreadable, his jaw clenched. "Because if I fight every battle, they'll only see you as weaker." I stared at him, the words slicing deeper than any insult. "So your solution is to let me suffer alone?" His eyes flickered, something breaking behind them. "I thought you wanted distance." "Distance doesn't mean abandonment." My voice cracked. "I wanted space, not this emptiness. Not to feel like I'm invisible beside you." He reached for me then, his hand trembling, but I stepped back. My chest burned with too many emotions, love, anger, despair. "I can't do this anymore," I whispered. "Not like this." For the first time, Ethan's mask shattered. His voice was hoarse, desperate. "Don't leave." But I turned away. And in that moment, I wasn't sure if either of us knew how to fix what was breaking. That night, I packed a bag. Just enough clothes to last a week. I left him sleeping on the couch, his face pale in the glow of the city lights. My heart shattered with every step I took, but I couldn't stay in a house that felt more like a battlefield than a home. I checked into a small hotel across the city, the kind of place where no one asked questions. Alone, I let the tears fall until I couldn't breathe. My phone buzzed endlessly with messages I couldn't bear to read. For the first time since we married, I wasn't waiting for him to come home. But God, I wanted him to. The hotel room was suffocating. The cheap curtains blocked out the city lights, but they couldn't block out the memories of him. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan, his tired smile, the weight of his gaze, the tremor in his voice when he said don't leave. But I had left. My phone lit up again, buzzing against the nightstand. Dozens of missed calls, messages piling up. For a moment, I let myself imagine him standing outside my door, knocking until his knuckles bled. But when I unlocked the screen, reality greeted me. Just texts. "Please call me. I need to see you. Don't shut me out like this." I dropped the phone onto the bed, curling up in the dark. Loneliness pressed down like a weight I couldn't shake. For so long I had been terrified of closeness, but distance was far more brutal than I'd ever imagined. 2 days passed, then 3. I tried to keep busy walks through quiet streets, meals eaten alone in cafes where no one knew me. But every shadow looked like him. Every passing car made me hope it was his. On the 4th night, there was a knock at my hotel door. My chest seized. I knew it was him. I felt it in my bones. When I opened the door, Ethan stood there, soaked from the rain, his shirt clinging to him, his hair a dark mess. His eyes found mine, raw and unguarded. "You ran," he said softly. "I had to," I whispered. My throat tightened. I couldn't breathe anymore. He stepped forward, and for once, there was no distance in him, no walls, just a man stripped bare. "Neither could I. Not without you." Tears pricked my eyes. "Ethan," he cut me off, voice breaking. "I was wrong. About everything. About how to protect you, about what you needed. I thought being silent, holding back, would keep you safe. But it only hurt you. It hurt us." My chest ached at the rawness in his tone. I'd never heard him so undone. "I don't need perfect," I whispered. "I just need you. And I need to know you'll stand beside me, not behind me. Not silent." He reached up, cupping my face in his trembling hands. "I'll fight for you. Not because you're weak, but because you're mine. And because you deserve to know you're not alone in this." The words shattered something inside me. For the first time, I believed him, not the CEO, not the mask, but Ethan. Just Ethan. And then I was in his arms, the rain soaking us both, his lips pressing against mine with a desperation that felt like salvation. We didn't fix everything overnight. Healing wasn't sudden. Came slowly, like sunlight after a storm. Ethan learned to speak not in grand speeches, but in small moments. You did well today. I missed you. Stay. Words that stitched me back together. And I learned to let him in. To reach for his hand when panic clawed at me. To let my voice shake in front of him and trust he wouldn't turn away. To believe that my flaws weren't burdens, but parts of me he had chosen to love. We stumbled, of course. There were nights when silence crept back in, when fear whispered that maybe this was too fragile to last. But each time, Ethan reminded rough words, through touch, through the steady presence of his love, that we were stronger than fear. Months later, we stood together at another gala. My chest tightened as the cameras flashed, but this time, Ethan's hand was firmly clasped in mine. When Madison approached, her smile as sharp as ever, I braced myself. But before she could speak, Ethan cut her off. "This is my husband," he said, his voice firm, his gaze unwavering. "And I won't tolerate anyone who disrespects him." The room went silent. Madison's smile faltered, and for the first time, I felt the weight lift off my chest, because I wasn't alone anymore. Ethan squeezed my hand, and when I looked at him, there was pride in his eyes. Not pity, not frustration, pride. And in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. With him. Later that night, back in our apartment, I curled against him on the couch, listening to the steady beat of his heart. The city lights painted our living room gold, and for once, silence felt like home. "You know," I whispered, "I never thought I'd find this. Someone who could see me, even when I'm hiding." His arm tightened around me. "You don't have to hide anymore." I smiled against his chest, tears slipping down my cheeks, not of sadness, but of relief, of joy. Because he was right. I didn't have to hide. Not from him, not from myself. And as his lips brushed my hair, as his warmth anchored me, I finally understood what love was. Not distance, not perfection, but two broken people choosing, every day, to be each other's safe place. Months turned into a year. The scars of our beginning didn't vanish, but they became part of our story, reminders of how far we'd come. Ethan wasn't just my husband anymore. He was my partner, my anchor, my home. And me? I wasn't just the boy with anxiety anymore. I was someone who had learned to stand, even when my voice shook. Someone who had found the courage to love and be loved in return. Together, we had broken the contract of distance. Together, we had written something far stronger. A marriage. A love. Forever. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.